The police minister has called on the community to help bring perpetrators of crime to justice. Cele has told the portfolio committee on police that in many cases families have pressurized victims to withdraw cases against those committing crime. He says without the cooperation of the community, it is difficult to bring perpetrators to book. All right, let's continue then on this conversation regarding crime statistics, and we bring in Dr. Guy Lamb. It's always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us here on SABC News as always.
My pleasure.
The murder on the rise, specifically child murders, and to even say that's concerning is really an understatement. What do you make of the crime stats, but in particular the rise of cases of murder?
I mean, these crime stats, kind of paint a kind of a common trend we've been seeing, which certainly has been a gradual increase in murder over the past 10 to 12 years. If we look at the crime stats that have been provided to us, which is for the quarter October to December, so quarter from October to December last year, and then it's compared to the previous years. I mean, the interesting issue here is if we look over the 5-year trend that they've given us, murder's actually increased by 21%.
Wow.
So in the past year, it's increased by close to 9%, but over a 5-year period, it's been by 21%. So that's a key consideration, because murder is one of the most reliable crime statistics, where sort of sexual violence, rape, those kind of crime categories aren't reliable because of very low reporting rates.
Yeah.
So if rape and sexual violence go up and down, it's very difficult to say, is that type of crime going down or just less people reporting it?
Exactly.
But of course...
And that's where I wanted to go. Sorry, Dr. Lamb, to come in here. But you just raised a very interesting point, saying that, it's a reliable stat, that of murder. And that's where I actually wanted to go. I mean, if we're looking at other crimes, and the Department of the Department of Police may indeed be proud of the fact that other crimes have gone down. But when we're looking at the issue of crime, and I don't want to say that it's the worst crime, I don't want to weigh up crimes. Indeed, we know that rape and abuse and all of that, of course, are criminal offences. But if we're to look at the issue of murder still being up, I mean, can we rightly then say that we are experiencing a decline in other areas?
Well, it's around. I mean, I think the world over, murder or homicide, it depends on which category it's used, is seen as the most reliable, and that's the sort of crude indicator of whether violent crime is going up or down. Yeah. Of course, one does need to look at other categories, but our robbery data isn't that good because of the high crime areas. There's not very high levels of reporting that happen there, where obviously in the middle class and wealthy suburbs reporting does happen. But I think when we look at these stats, I think the big concern for me that comes out of the data is KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at, major increases in the murder ratio. So this is the per population. If you're looking at particularly at Inanda, KwaMashu, and Tazuma, where you've seen major increases in murder happening there, where in the Western Cape it's stabilized, it's actually coming down. So there's clearly, from a prioritization point of view, there needs to be a lot more focus on KZN.
Yeah. I mean, you raised KZN as if you anticipated where I was going with my next questioning. They have raised the fact that 3 of their police stations are sitting in the top 5 stations nationally that are dealing with murder cases. What can this be attributed to? Why KZN? Why are we always talking about KZN? I mean, if I think at the top of my mind, when I think about KZN, I'm usually thinking about political murders, and we often hear about political murders happening in KZN, but that number can't all be attributed to political murder. So what more are we looking at then? Why is KZN such a problem?
I suppose I mean, I'm not an expert and a specialist on KZN, but what we know from the crime stats and what we know from other studies is, number one, the crime stats are talking about a lot of murders are caused by arguments, disagreements, conflicts between people, often in the context of drinking. And often it's about access to certain weapons, either having a sharp instrument on you, such as a knife, or having access to firearms. And I think what's happened in KwaZulu-Natal is certainly it's become a lot more unstable in certain areas. In the build-up to the riots of last year and unrest of last year, and following on from that, I think there's a lot of unreported tensions that certainly don't make it into mainstream English-speaking media. But I think many who live in these areas where these murders are happening, they're seeing this for themselves firsthand. So I think it's about tensions within the ruling party that's happening and playing out in some of those levels. So it's it's political assassinations and murders, and some of them are really just around tensions and sort of norms that exist in certain areas around resolving conflicts and using violence to do that.
So I'm just disturbed by an earlier point that you made that murder in the past, I think you said 5 year. If you look at the 5 year trend, has gone up. In fact, 21%.
21%.
I think that's what you said. Yes, indeed. So then I would think to myself, if we're reporting on all these crime stats all the time, I would have thought that these stats every year or every quarter are looked at, and then something is done about it. We're analysed and what we can do to decrease the crime. But if the crime is increasing, then what's the point? Why are you telling us if you're not doing anything about it? I mean, if you're looking at all of these stats, surely there's something more that is being done about them. I mean, I'm assuming the department then brings people like yourselves to kind of analyse and see, where situations can be fixed. I mean, I don't want to be having a conversation with you a couple of years from now and we realise that, murder's gone up 30-40%. I mean, surely something then needs to be done after we've released these crime stats.
I mean, I think the police have very good crime analysts. They've got data, they've got GIS data, so they actually have really good data. Sometimes it might not be the best reported data in terms of communities cooperating with the police and reporting crime, but the police have a lot of data and they have crime analysts. I think the kind of situation here is that that seems to be stuck in a rut of this is the police, this is what you do, and you keep on doing the same things and sort of hoping that it's going to make a difference. I mean, we did have a period in time sort of from the late 1990s to about 2009 where the police were making a difference, and it had to do with targeted operations, targeting illegal firearms, looking at wanted persons, and the foot sort of got taken off the accelerator a bit after that, and we've seen the murder rate climbing almost every year or sort of staying at elevated levels, but there's been an upward trend since after the FIFA World Cup. We've certainly seen that trend. And I think it's about, there are lots of ideas and there's strategies that have been developed. It's now the point, and it ultimately comes down to just sort of the police and the rest of government don't really work well together on kind of trying to prevent crime in the long term. And that's what needs to be the focus. I mean, the police are one lever to pull, but there are many others.
Yeah.
And we just haven't got this integrated approach right.
Dr. Lamb, are we still seeing remnants of, I'll call it COVID-19 related or linked crimes, still kind of, causing a dent in what we're seeing in the crime stats? I mean, we had heard at some point, I think it might have been last year, where, we'd heard that domestic violence was on the increase because of the fact that, we're on lockdown, we're in the house together. So there'd been a lot more incidences of domestic violence. Are we still seeing that? I mean, it does seem as though things have normalized somewhat in terms of lockdown, or it's not as bad as it used to be, but I wonder if we are still seeing the effects of the pandemic.
It's difficult to tell because, I mean, the sort of levels of crime have varied from province to particularly at the station level, and it's difficult to pick up a pattern in some areas. I mean, the one thing we did know about this period was there was the greater access to alcohol than we had in the previous period. So they didn't put any hard lockdown measures in terms of restricting access to alcohol over December, because that's usually a key issue. The combination of people being on holiday, people interacting more, people, kind of drinking a lot more tends to lead to an escalation in violence. So that can explain in certain areas why that went up. But in terms of driving other kinds of crimes, we just don't know enough about what sort of the impact COVID had on the economy. We know a lot of people lost jobs. We know a lot of people are more hungry than they were before. There's food insecurity, but we don't know if that had an impact on crime or not. In the sense of around, often South Africans are just trying to make a plan. But I think what it potentially did is it might have escalated arguments in the context of drinking. That's what we may have seen in terms of limited access to resources. You add an alcohol to that kind of context, and then a greater number of arguments follow on from that.
All right, Dr. Guy Lamb, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for speaking to us here on SABC News, sir.
It's my pleasure.